Okay, guys, I'm here today with John Danaher. Huge honor for me and Plácido. And guys, this week John is sharing an entire instruction all about the Anaconda. So master the move Anaconda. And John, can you explain your work?
The whole Anaconda series is a move and set of concepts that I've always been fascinated by because it started relatively early in my career. When you look at front headlock positions, the number one move out of front headlock is a positional move, a go behind. Plácido, can I borrow you? The number one move in the sport, whenever we're in front headlock situations, are variations of go behind, where I go from being in front of my opponent and I get past my training partner's elbows. So from a situation where we get past the elbows and start moving behind, we go from in front of our opponent to behind our opponent. And these will always be the number one move in the sport, okay? Because you get the back, so you get positional score, and you get to the number one finishing position in the sport, which is the rear mounted position. So you always have that as your number one move. It's a positional move. But you can't just have a positional move, because the barrier you're trying to get past, the barrier you're trying to get around, is your opponent's elbows. Now, if we can do a good job of blocking those elbows, then great. The go behind is the number one move. But if Plácido does a good job of keeping those elbows in front of me, you have to have alternatives. If you can't score positionally, you got to go through with submission holds. Now the good news is, when you're in front headlock position, you have at your disposal every variation of guillotine attack.
Yep.
You have dasers, and of course you have anacondas.
Yep.
There's other versions of other strangles from the front, but we'll cover those in another time. The basic dichotomy is, if I can get behind my opponent's elbows, we're going positional. As long as I'm in front of my training partner's elbows, this is where we can start to attack various forms of strangleholds from the front. And in my opinion, Anaconda is one of the very best ones. In the case of Anaconda, it has something in common with all the other front headlock attacks. It can turn a match around in a matter of seconds. You could be losing a whole match, and if you see that opportunity, that fleeting opportunity from front headlock, and you've got a good Anaconda, just as you could with a good guillotine or a good das, you can turn everything around and come out with a submission victory. The head is the single most available target in all of Jiu-Jitsu, because the majority of our time is spent in neutral positions where we're head to head with each other, whether we're standing or down on the ground. Because in the sport of Jiu-Jitsu, most of the time of a given match is spent in these head-to-head positions, that's exactly where we can start going in and get into these front headlock submissions. Okay, so we play a basic dilemma game between the positional attack, where you're trying to get behind your opponent's elbows, and the submission attack, which can occur at any time in a match and turn it around in a heartbeat when you're in front of the elbows. You've got a short list of leading candidates. There's always going to be guillotine variations. There's always going to be das variations. And of course, Anaconda is one of my favorites. Now, with regards to my own experience of Anacondas, I think it's important for people to realize that the Anaconda seems to have been completely absent in Jiu-Jitsu prior to the 1990s. You don't see any record of Anacondas. My personal Anaconda journey started not through Jiu-Jitsu, but through wrestling. In the sport of wrestling, there were numerous wrestlers, especially in the international styles of wrestling, who would use a strangle from front headlock position. And this was done for many years. The most famous exponent of this was David Schultz, the legendary American wrestler. But there were many others too. And they would use front headlock strangles, they were in the gray zone with legality. In wrestling, you're not really supposed to strangle people, of course, but it was technically a legal move because it was performed from a front headlock. And what they would do is they would use the wrist to attack the carotid artery here, and they would use their opponent's shoulder on the other side. By taking their hand bent in this position, they could go on at the tricep and lock up a palm-to-palm grip, strong body Plácido, and then from here they could pull their opponent's elbow on by and put their head in behind like so. And from here, by closing their elbows, they could create a very strong strangle effect out of front headlocks. And I was fascinated by this. And I thought to myself, you know, in Jiu-Jitsu, when we get behind people, we can strangle palm to palm, but most of the time we prefer figure four grips. And there was an obvious question here, like, couldn't you just take the same position and instead of locking palm to palm, go figure four? And that's how I started using anacondas. Now the idea is pretty simple. It doesn't take a lot of imagination to go from here to here. And so I believe numerous people throughout the jiu-jitsu community probably came across this idea at roughly the same time, because Brazilian top team also, I had no contact with them and they had no contact with me. They seem to have come up with the same idea at roughly the same time, somewhere in the 1990s. And they were very successful with it. And I think most people associate the move first with them because they use it in competition. My use of these came in two different directions. I would hit anacondas on this side, and then I came up with the idea of a das on this side, which was taught to my student Joe Diassi, and he became famous as the guy who used das first in competition. So that's how it started. It actually came more out of a wrestling program. And in various gyms, it seems, across the jiu-jitsu world, people came up with these variations of what seems to have been first a wrestling type attack from front headlock, and then modified it to figure four grips. But it wasn't just the figure four grip. There was something else that had to be engineered. But again, this comes from the sport of wrestling. In the sport of wrestling, especially in the international styles of wrestling, you get rewarded for turning your opponent across the shoulders. You get points for this. And two of the very best ways of doing this were what were described when I was young, eons ago, as an Olympic roll, where you would roll through on an opponent and turn him across his shoulders. Typically from here, he would get back up to his base, and you would score, in the sport of wrestling, 2 points for turning the man across the shoulders. And you can go in two directions for this. You can go in the direction I just outlined, or you can walk into your opponent and turn him across
and come back to
in the opposite direction. Okay, you can go left and right with this. So I was fascinated by this because the wrestlers used it very well positionally to go behind people. They would turn people across the shoulders and score points and then go behind. And then when I started playing with the idea of a figure four grip, I tied that up with Olympic rolls in both directions, and they were highly successful. And I wasn't the only one to do this. Obviously, Brazilian top team did the same thing at roughly the same time. And so I think historically, my influence, I can't speak for the guys at the American top team, I'm not sure how they came across it, but it came from the sport of wrestling. In wrestling, there were guys who specialized in strangles from front headlock, but they were doing it from palm to palm grips. Then, because in jiu-jitsu we mostly strangle with figure four grips, that was an easy thing to add on. And then the idea of Olympic rolls, also taken from the sport of wrestling, but modified with this grip. And then the last piece of the puzzle was the idea of the T position. If you lock a figure four grip in this position and just try to strangle from here, it's usually not successful. It's pretty easy for an opponent to arm drag his way out of here and break the grip. Okay, so what was needed was the amalgamation of that figure four grip with an Olympic roll, culminating in a position where you formed a T relative to your opponent. And that's where the real birth of the Anaconda started off. So from any given situation where we roll a training partner through, I want to work my way into a position where my body forms a T relative to my opponent.
That's amazing.
What this does is it creates an unnatural head position for Placido, where his head is put into a forced and unnatural position where his ear goes towards his shoulder. And this creates a group of factors which really create a very tight strangle. I can trap his head in place. You can form a complete occlusion of the carotids on both sides, through his shoulder on one side and my forearm slash bicep on the other. And then when Placido tries to walk away from me, all I've got to do is close those elbows, and you get an extremely tight strangle. And this formed, in my opinion, one of the greatest advances in submission in jiu-jitsu. And it seems to have occurred in the 1990s at different locations around the jiu-jitsu world. The ideas behind it were pretty simple and pretty, in hindsight, it's easy to see how they came out of the sport of wrestling and were modified. And once you had all these things put together, the initial insight from wrestling based on two things: the palm-to-palm strangle made famous by people like Dave Schultz, the Olympic roll from freestyle wrestling in both directions, and then modifying that to a figure 4 grip plus the T position, and that's when you had this explosion in the use of the Anaconda somewhere in the mid-1990s in different locations. And in our gym at Renzo Gracie in New York, it was very, very effective from early on. And I know Brazilian top team had tremendous success with it, not only in the gym but also in competition. It was a very famous case where the great Brazilian athlete Nogueira, I think that was the first public display of the strangle, and it caused something of a revolution when it first came out. And then you had that combined with the darts, which is just it's just an anaconda in the opposite direction, and it really did change the game considerably.
Yeah, John, one question that I would ask you, like in the turtle, how do you make a decision if you're gonna go for anaconda, darts, or guillotine?
That's a great question. Yeah, great question.
What's normally like the principle to follow there too?
Most of it has to do with elbow position.
Okay.
Let's say I'm performing a right-handed strangle. If you come on this side, Bernardo. If I'm performing a right-handed front headlock in here, I look at my opponent's elbow position. The more the elbow comes back and away, the easier it's going to be to get into guillotines. Okay? The more the elbow gets taken across in front of the body, the easier it's going to be to block his elbow from behind and go into anacondas.
Okay.
If my opponent resists the elbow going forward and across, I can take an anaconda, but now it won't be with a figure 4 grip, it'll be with a 5-finger grip here.
Okay.
And this will enable us to take his body in the opposite direction to the T. Okay, so again, elbow position is the deciding factor, not only on my technique selection, but also which variation I'll be using.
So it's all about the elbow, like how the elbow is positioned.
And with regards to Das, that has to do with not just his elbow position, but my position relative to the elbow. The Das is performed when I'm behind the elbow. The Anaconda is performed when I'm in front of the elbow. So from here, Anaconda makes more sense. But if I come around and my knee is behind my opponent's elbow, now the Das makes way more sense. Okay, and from here we can break someone down and start going into our strangles. Okay, so you see how the elbow is the focal point of where you want, of how you're going to choose which attack. The further back it is, the more we go for guillotines. The further forward and across it is, the more we go for Dases with an inside roll. The further out the elbow is, and we're still in front, we're going to go the opposite way for the Anaconda. And then if my body is behind his elbow, then the Das makes more sense. Excellent question.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. That was a good question.
In the video, once we break down the right way to use the T position, because everything in this video is about how to maximize your effectiveness in the T position, then we're going to part 2 of the video, which is how to get to the T position from anywhere. Okay, standing, ground, front, back, top, bottom, I don't care. Yeah, you should be able to get it from any position. And there's a long section there on, in any situation you might conceivably find yourself in Jiu-Jitsu, how to
there's always an opportunity.
There's always an opportunity. The head is the most available target. It's one of the big themes of the video. And then we show how to get there in numerous different ways. And then finally, there's a section on, well, what if I can't get the T position? This whole video is about how to get to the T position, why it's the best. What if you can't do it? Well, that's when you start finishing with guard position. So let's say, for example, I've gone in and I've locked the figure 4 on my training partner, and I'm feeling for whatever reason that breaking him down to a hip is impossible. Okay, remember, our number one thing from here is to put him down on a hip, because once the hips touch the ground, that's when the T position is so strong, so available. So a natural question is, well, what do you do if you can't do that? Well, the obvious one here is go behind them. Okay? Go back to position. Use the other side of the dilemma. Another one is go back to the original move that we looked at in this YouTube video, which is go back to the Schultz strangle. If I can't break them down, then why can't I just finish from in here instead? Okay, so that's another alternative. But in my opinion, one of the best is to stay with the Anaconda, but instead of finishing in T position, throw your legs around them. So when we lock up, I'm going to come up into a standing position just like so, and then from here I throw one leg to the outside, and the second leg goes across my training partner like this, and then from here we can attack with either my hands like so, or like so, and get a good finish. Okay?
Oh, that's awesome.
there always has to be the sense of step-by-step, systematic ways of entering into the move. So the basic idea behind the move is, let's demonstrate how it began. It has its roots in the sport of wrestling, and the modifications that were made to make it a big part of Jiu-Jitsu. The idea of the switch to figure 4 grips and the crucial role of the T position. Develop a very, very strong understanding of what makes the T position, what's going to make you very, very effective if you can achieve the T position, and then a program to get to that position from anywhere. And then finally, if you can't break them down to it, can't get the T position, what are your alternatives?
Right. No, that makes total sense, John. And yeah, so guys, this week John is showing the entire structure all about the Anaconda, which is part of the series Master the Move Anaconda. And as you guys can see, like, there's a lot to learn from this move. And make sure to check it out. It's going to be at IBJJFanatics.com, and maybe by the time you're watching, it's already there. So I hope you guys enjoyed, and thanks so much, John.
Good to see you again.
Thanks. Thank you, Placido.